So after reading chapter one about human relations in higher education institutions and the shifting that's happening there, first of all, reading this was kind of during the downturn of the economy. And because the economy has actually boomed in the past few years, community college enrollment has gone down drastically. Um, and that has had an impact on our enrollment and how HR and everything functions and who we are able to hire part-time versus full-time. And we have been fortunate where we didn't have to allow anybody to go. Um, but when someone would leave, we wouldn't fill that position and use part-time faculty to do that. So Nash has kind of been fortunate in that area. So at Nash Community College, we have one um, director of human resources, and she has an assistant who works part-time. And so much like what the book was talking about, our person in HR basically just kind of manages the hiring process, making sure the complaints and all that. They handle all the traditional model of HR. I did like the model in its redefinition or kind of the shifting of where it moves into knowing more about the student learning outcomes and how that relates. I think that would help my argument on why we need to pay faculty more in areas that it's hard to find faculty, where the private sector can pull those people. In computer information technology, for example, the person who teaches that could easily go into private industry right now and probably make a lot more money, but they don't because of they like teaching for one thing. We do allow them to do some overtime for those courses, and so that keeps them here. But when we're having the argument about eliminating overtime and allowing a part-time faculty member to teach that, that's where I would like HR and our business office, who work together a lot, on seeing the importance of matching the salaries that private industry would offer. As far as what the role of research universities play now, and I'm not in a research university, so I'm kind of speaking from inexperience here. I can see the struggle with funding research institutions because they may not pay for themselves. So they're doing all this research and they really don't see that money come back to themselves. Where in private industry, there's this incentive where if you research and you find this thing, you get to patent it, it's yours, and you get all this money for doing that. And that's why you've seen Silicon Valley do so much of the research that maybe universities used to do. I mean, the internet has been born because of universities and military, where they were having communication from government. But now that's shifted from the private sector doing a lot of this research. That's why Apple, Amazon, Google, these companies aren't really probably working with higher education institutions that much. They're doing it so much in-house. So maybe a shift needs to happen where, again, where it did mention research institutions being separated from the other part of the institution, and those research components continue to work more with the private sector, maybe training people on how to do research, how to do creative thinking within those research, modeling that, and then maybe even using the resources at private industry, making those people come up with the technology that's needed to do that, because we are seeing the decline, according to this, the decline of resources from the government to higher education institutions. So to summarize, I learned a lot from this chapter, but at our institution, HR is much of the traditional. It's not transformational at all. Maybe that's where it'll start shifting, but again, it will require more people. I mean, the people who are in those positions are doing about as much as they can do at this point. But I do like the idea of institutions being separated and given a little bit more say in what they can do, a little bit less regulations. I think the accrediting bodies, there are 6 of the accrediting institutions, they're doing a good job, like SACS and those things. They're peer reviewed, and I think they do a good job in pushing some areas. I think sometimes they step in too much, but I think if you give institutions a little bit more freedom, allow them to experiment, they might model somewhat of what the private industry is doing and might could do better. So those are my thoughts on the first chapter.